Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. It's absolutely fantastic to be back here, and I'm loving all the engagement that's happening in the chat already. It's lovely to see you, and the community has been really strong on Twitter this week. There's been a lot of love and support for each other, which really kind of backs up this community that's grown around the show as well. So thank you for tuning in. If you're watching this back or listening back, thank you for doing that as well, because that really helps. First of all, hello and welcome. And obviously today is Armistice Day for everybody that knows about that. We're reminded of the sacrifices made by civilians and the military back in World War One. And on the 11th hour of the 11th day in the 11th month of 1918, that ceasefire was signed so that the war could end. And, we can't thank you enough, and we do and will remember you. So thank you. Everyone else, we've got a great show coming up today, and it's a bit of a different kind of twist to it. We've got two guests on today, and that has not happened since back in, I think, February of this year. And that has really flown by when I had Anna Gomez and Christopher Pollard on the show. And obviously that was a lot of fun. So this should be too. And it's a bit of a different twist because the guests on tonight, they have a lot of knowledge in the editing world and the publishing world. And hopefully we're going to get a lot of nuggets of writing advice and writing tips in the show tonight that were really beneficial for the community. So if you have sent some stuff in, we are going to try and get through a couple of them. The people on the show tonight have had a look at a few, and we will give some advice in that area as well. And if you do have questions, please save them up for the end of the show as always. And I will get the guests on. So on tonight's show, I do have Tash Barsby and Lizzy Goudsmit. Oh, sorry, Kate. Oh my goodness, I butchered that. And Tash, I'm blaming you. Hello to you both.
I'm sorry.
You proper put that in my head. I do apologize. Hello to you both. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you're well.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so thank you for all the comments coming in. There's been a load in there, so sorry for distracting me. Yeah, Tash, thank you so much for joining me. Lizzy, the same. Thank you for spending your time with us, and hopefully we're going to get to know you guys a little bit and figure out some tips and advice for the community as well. So first of all, Tash, we'll start with you and just get a bit of a background with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
You obviously have worked in or an editor yourself, and have lived and worked in the writing world for some time. So if you could give us a little bit of background on yourself, that would be fantastic.
Brief overview. Sure. So my very first job in publishing was at Hachette Children's Books. I was a kind of department assistant for the editorial team, which was a really kind of brilliant introduction to publishing. But, the books that I was working on didn't really cross over with my sort of personal reading tastes. I was working on books called Dinosaurs Have Feelings, which were, and obviously dinosaurs do have feelings.
Of course.
I'm a big kind of crime and thriller reader, and that's the area that I wanted to be working in. So I then joined Transworld Publishers in the copy editorial department, which is the sort of the slightly unglamorous kind of back end of editing, where it's all, kind of very grammar and spelling and punctuation focused, which is right up my street. So that's, so that was a kind of great start. Again, kind of did that for about 18 months. And then an opportunity came up in the crime and thriller team. And I was like, yes, this is it. So moved over to that team as an assistant editor, and then worked in that team for just over 6 years. Kind of working my way up to commissioning editor. So I was kind of building my own list and obviously publishing some brilliant books. And then in August of this year, I joined the Novelry as senior editor.
Fantastic. Yeah. That's quite a journey, and I'm glad to know that dinosaurs do in fact have feelings. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tash. And Lizzy, you must be thrilled to hear that coming from someone who's actually written what is, according to the blurb on your page on Amazon, the most addictive page-turning thriller of 2020.
That's nice. I don't think I even wrote that about myself, so someone else said it.
It's on there. It is. So yeah, thank you so much. Genuinely. Lizzy, can we hear a little bit about your background? And of course, you're an author yourself as well. So, how does that kind of reflect in what you do now?
So I started actually also in a children's team in what was then Random House Children's, and moved very quickly to work for Transworld Publishers. And I was a personal assistant there in the non-fiction team. And I stayed with Transworld for 8 years, which is how Tash and I first met, working on lots of different books, non-fiction, some crime, some literary fiction, women's fiction, kind of all different genres, really. Working up to senior commissioning editor. So I had my own list, worked with lots of wonderful writers, and then in August of this year moved to join the Novelry. And in the meantime, while having my editorial hat on, I also wrote my first, well, it wasn't my first novel that I'd written, it was the first novel then to be published, which came out in April of last year, called 7 Lies, and currently working on the second one, which is proving a slightly tougher task, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
So yes, I wear the two hats, editor and writer.
And how does that balance out? Do you kind of feel that your writing benefits editing, or is it kind of the reverse of that? How does that work?
I would say both. I'm probably a more compassionate editor because I know what it's like to receive editorial notes, and how in some ways it's much easier to point out what's wrong with something than to be the person who then has to fix it. So I think that probably does make me a slightly kinder editor these days. But they're different.
To me, who's completely horrible, of course.
Mean notes that Tash. No, I think they probably both support each other. I think being able to appreciate what it's like to receive notes and have to try and fix those holes in a plot is a useful skill. And certainly everything I've learned as an editor assists me in my own writing, and hopefully I avoid some common pitfalls. Definitely. Not all of them, for sure.
I did just pop your cover up in the corner there because I did look at it and it's fantastic, so it had to go up there. Tash, what about you? I know you, when you mentioned editing, it was kind of a glint in your eye, like, yeah, I want to get stuck into that. I mean, are you a very harsh editor?
I mean, you'd have to ask my boss. I don't think so. I always try and be very nice. No, I mean, you know, I think what kind of everyone has to remember is that, you know, editing is a completely subjective process. And I always think it kind of works best when it's a partnership between the editor and the author. And, you know, the editor in a publishing house or with us at the Novelry will really fall in love with a book, and, you know, will kind of be as invested in it as the author sometimes. And so, you know, the kind of comments and suggestions we make are always kind of made with, you know, with the kind of very best intentions at heart. But you know, kind of what I really love is when, you know, I kind of point out something that's not quite working and say, you know, you could do it like this. And the author comes back saying, like, you know, I don't think that's quite right, but what about this? I'm like, yes, that is, you know, that's brilliant. You know, it's that kind of collaboration, which I think, you know, is kind of the goal, really.
Yeah.
And I think a writer tends to know their book best. So when they say, like, I think I have another way to do it, it's invariably better than what the editor suggests, because they know their characters. So you can say, this bit doesn't ring true, or this character isn't quite working, and as Tash says, here's a possible fix, and they go, or this, and you go, oh yeah, much better, do that one, do that one.
Do you ever find yourself working on, say, a genre or a book you're not really a massive fan of, and still go down that working process, or is that kind of not a thing for an editor to do?
We don't really. I mean, when we started at the Novelry, within a few weeks, it became very clear that we were missing someone with science fiction and fantasy expertise. And that's not something that Tash and I or our colleague Lily had ever done. So thankfully, Craig, who's a brilliant editor, joined us from Titan. So I think there are areas where we feel less confident, and certainly those kind of genre specific places. You know, I have no idea if 3 dragons is too many dragons for a story. Craig knows. He knows that. All of those things that are just kind of beyond. I don't read enough in that area. I haven't worked enough in that area. So I think definitely there are areas we're less confident in. And it's been about kind of plugging gaps in the team to make sure as a group we can cover everything.
Yeah. There was definitely 3 dragons in Game of Thrones, so I think it works.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Surely.
30, 300, I don't know.
Well,
That's
yeah,
the line.
it kind of feels like the Novelry is building a super team of staff there. It's like the Avengers of writing. I mean, what is the goal for the
you
Novelry?
said it, not us.
What is the goal there? For people, we've kind of mentioned this before, but if someone is watching this or listening that hasn't listened to that show about the Novelry, we had Kate on last week, but what's that about? If you can give a brief description, and what was the attraction for you guys to work there? What's the vibe behind the Novelry setup?
It's so it started off. It was a really small company it's still a small company. There are 13 of us, and I think that's really refreshing. And what the Novelry offers is novel writing courses where we work across the world. And all the writers have access to the author tutors, of which Katie was one and still is sometimes, as well as being the creative director, who are all experienced novelists who bring so much wisdom and creativity to their work and offer such good advice. And there's an in-house editorial team, which is us, who perhaps don't fulfill that role of mentoring quite the same way. I often think that we're the slightly tougher end, where we'll say, I don't know if that doesn't feel very marketable, or but what's the pitch, or we don't feel the ending works. So in a sense, you get some hand holding from people who are really wise and smart and clever and give great advice, and you will also get the tougher advice from us.
Okay, so does it take?
It's a good thing. I hope it's a good thing.
Yeah. Does it take more than say an editor alone, or say a proofreader, and going down that kind of one route thing then, and needing a team from all different angles to create this kind of perfect combination? Do you think that is a kind of a necessary thing, or can you kind of go it alone almost?
I think you can go it alone, but so Louise Dean, who's the founder, who's set the company up, the reason she set it up was because she was at her desk writing and was like kind of struggling with her draft, and just kind of wanted a community of writers who were going through the same thing that she could talk to. And so that's the kind of what's really at the heart of the Novelry is kind of building this community where everyone can give advice to each other, whether that's us to the writers or the writers to themselves, or to kind of to each other. It's writing can be a very kind of solitary journey, but it doesn't have to be, and that's where we come in.
Fantastic. Lizzy, as you mentioned, a commissioning editor, what was the attraction for you? What did you look into when books were submitted?
So for me, when I was deciding whether or not I wanted to publish a book, it was really about pitch first and foremost. The pitch is so important. And if people have kind of submitted to agents in the past or entered competitions, they will have seen this firsthand. And the pitch is really that one line that sums up what your book is and why it's special. Because that is what an agent uses to pitch to an editor, and it's what an editor uses to talk to the kind of the team in-house. Publicity will go out and talk to journalists with that same one line, the sales team to retailers. So that's kind of a fundamental component. Beyond that, for me, it was always about, I love a mystery, like a story that pulls me through it, and kind of really solid quality prose. So not necessarily kind of literary or flowery in any way, but just really smart and succinct was always something that would draw me in.
It must be very, very hard, though, to summarize a book that could be, 60, 70, 80, 100,000 words into 1 or 2 lines that is going to be the tagline. I mean, how often did you see a tagline and maybe think, that didn't look appealing, perhaps, and then look at the story or the blurb and think, actually, this is completely, is it off track often? Or did you think, they really kind of get the gist across with that very short text?
I think kind of the opposite in a sense. Like, if the pitch is really good, normally the book is too. I think it's quite rare to read a pitch and be like, ooh, that sounds really great, and then to start the book and be disappointed. So in a way, if you can capture it in one line and you get people thinking it's going to be great, you're over a big hurdle already.
Okay. So the question behind that, I mean, we're going to look into, in fact, I'll save that for later when we look into these, because obviously that would be a good time for that. And there's a question coming early. I may as well ask this because it's kind of figuring out about you guys as well at this stage. And thank you for the question coming in. It says, how many books can you read in a week? This is more of a can you than a do you.
Do you?
Yeah.
I think I can read a book in about 3 to 4 hours.
Wow. That's impressive.
If I don't have any distractions, if I haven't got, the dog asking me to take him for a walk, obviously my dog can speak, or, any emails popping through or anything like that. If I'm purely sitting down reading, I think a couple of hours. I mean,
wow.
I probably, when we were working at Transworld, used to get maybe kind of anywhere between 25 and 30 submissions a month.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was a lot of very intense reading, which didn't necessarily often leave much time for kind of reading for pleasure. So, I've kind of really kind of tried to carve out time in my week for, reading that's completely not work related, so I can kind of retain the joy of reading.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point to say, reading for pleasure as opposed to reading for work. How do you kind of describe that? How does that differ?
I think when I'm reading for work, I'm always reading with a kind of editor hat on, and so I'm kind of interrogating, where I might be able to improve it, or what the pitch could be, what the cover might look like, all that kind of stuff. But when I'm on holiday and I'm in pure reader mode, somehow all of those, like that part of my brain, I somehow, only on holiday though, can completely switch it off, and I can just sit back and be like, kind of book after book after book. And it's just, obviously work reading is still enjoyable because I love reading, and, and it's always really exciting to discover new stories. But I guess it's that part of my brain, which is, working as opposed to relaxing. I think that's the kind of distinction for me.
I do think you can cross, I think if you're reading something for work that's really good, you find yourself slipping into reader mode and almost forgetting to do the editor bit. I was reading something by one of the writers of the Novelry earlier this week, and I kept being like, hang on, I need to go back a few pages. I've been doing that kind of frantic, need to know what happens next reading, rather than, is everything making sense? Are there any typos kind of reading?
It's fantastic. And obviously modern technology, we've got the Kindles now. Do you still love a paperback or a hardback or Kindle? How do you read your books these days?
Mainly on paper. Well, for work, mainly on screen. For pleasure, mainly on paper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that the same for you, Tash?
I mean, I read workbooks. So when I edit, I read everything twice. I read first time on my Kindle, and I kind of try not to make any notes and just try to enjoy it as a reader and sort of get that first experience. And then I actually print it out, because I'm very old school, and scribble notes down and kind of literally go through it page by page. When I'm doing kind of pure relaxing pleasure reading, I do still just love a book. I really like the feel of physically turning a page and the noise it makes. It just, I don't know, it just kind of hits different, I think. And
being like, oh, I'm halfway through it. If I've got half in this hand, half in that, I don't know, there's something very satisfying about progressing through a book in a physical way, which you don't really get with like a little on-screen counter or percentage or whatever it might be.
And of course you get to stack them up behind you like that, and you can't do that with a Kindle. It doesn't look the same, does it?
No, and also you lose the covers, I think. I know you can see the cover on a Kindle, but it doesn't kind of travel around with you in quite like in your bag or in your home or by your bed. You can kind of lose the picture of the book.
Yeah.
I think the old cliche of you shouldn't judge a book by a cover is lost on me, because I absolutely do love a cover, and it just shouts at me straight away. Tito Minen, who came on the show, his book came out, The Rabbit Factor, I think last week or the week before, and that is absolutely brilliant. Just grabs me straight away. Are you guys similar with that? Do you think it influences you, or do you really go for the story?
Not even a little bit for the story. It's the title and the cover first and foremost, and what someone else says about it. This is a really cool book about something. and I'll think, oh, it's got a good title and a good jacket, and there we go. And then the story becomes important. But at first glance, you don't even know what the story is at first glance unless the cover tells you.
Yeah,
exactly. The cover has to do so much work to get you to pick it up and, you know, pick that book up rather than the 5 other books on the table. I think cover designers are like God's gift. They are just so brilliant.
Covers and titles make a difference. Joe says as well, that would be so exciting to encounter a book as an editor and lose yourself in it. How often does that happen? Or, you know, is it kind of a rare thing?
I would say in the commissioning role, it's almost a little bit stressful when it happens, because if it's a book you want to acquire from an agent, you're thinking, well, I'm probably not the only editor loving this book. This is probably not going to be, you know, there's probably going to be a battle if we were to publish this. Whereas in my current role, it's just a delight, because there's not that kind of added pressure of having to acquire it and think about publishing it. It is just reading it and talking to the writer and guiding them and hoping we can help them find an agent.
That's a really fascinating image in my mind there. Can you tell us like a bit behind the scenes of that world there? If you've got that book in your hands and you're thinking, oh, this is the next best thing, I need to get hold of this. What is the process like for you, and is it completely frantic?
You know, I think it depends who you ask. Well, because I think some editors, though, would say it's like really thrilling and invigorating. Frankly, if I started to love a book, I also started to feel a bit sick at the prospect of what was to come.
Amazing.
Because it's that kind of, you know, you're really enjoying it, but then also your stress levels are just going higher and higher because you're like, God, everyone else is going to be loving this too, aren't they?
Brilliant. So how do you actually approach an author that submitted that? And are they always through an agent, or do they sometimes submit kind of submission? Does that ever happen?
Almost entirely via an agent.
Okay.
I mean,
we're like
so rare as to
8.5%. Probably.
Fascinating.
And then if you love it, it's about hoping that your colleagues love it too. And normally if you really love it, it's because it really is wonderful, and everyone else in the company will start reading and loving it too, as is happening in all the other publishing houses across London or this country, or even wider than that perhaps. And then the agent and the author are laughing because they've got everyone desperate to publish it, which is the perfect position to be in as a writer. As an editor, it does feel a bit daunting.
Oh, I bet. You mentioned the community that kind of revolves around the Novelry, and also mentioned that, you know, the word of mouth was very important when it comes to decision of reading a book or not. So is that community, does that reflect in the Novelry as well? Do you know, you pick up each other's work and make suggestions that way?
Very much. It's a really supportive community. And obviously we have the author tutors who are publishing books regularly, and lots of our writers now are finding representation with agents and publishing contracts. So I think that side of things will grow and grow as the company has been around for longer, and as more writers reach the end of the courses and more of them see their books published.
Amazing. So talk me through it very quickly then, if you can. If I was, I am a self-published author, but if I was thinking, okay, let me take this step. I know, for example, I'm completely transparent with this. I know I rushed my first book through. I did everything for free, which I'm quite proud of, but that has come with sacrifices in the way that I've had grammatical pickups from people with a keen eye. So if I was to think, okay, I want to go and improve my way of doing things through the Novelry, what would my steps be, and how would that help me?
So if you were interested in how the Novelry works, anyone can have a free chat with one of our tutors who can kind of talk you through the courses and what's on offer and how we work. So it's kind of, that's for anyone who thinks it sounds a bit interesting and just wanted to know more. And then we offer 4 different courses, which are kind of grouped together in different packages. But essentially, it can take you from coming up with the idea and making sure your idea is good enough, right the way through to a finished edited manuscript. And then where manuscripts are looking really good and we feel they're really exciting, we then send them out to literary agents on behalf of the writers who want us to. Obviously, there's no pressure. And if writers want to submit independently, then that's absolutely their right. But where they would like us to submit, we have a whole list of agency partners who look forward to hearing from us.
Fantastic. So it really is a launching pad for your career then, basically, if you want to go down that route, and you guys can help out with that.
That's definitely the plan. And we're seeing more and more, we're submitting more and more work to agents and getting good feedback and good responses.
Okay, so Tash, as a keen editor, talk to me about that crazy language that I've seen editors write, because how long did that take to learn, and do people get completely confused by it?
What kind of language do you mean?
Do you know the editing notes on pages?
Like the symbols.
Yeah. Do you ever send that back to a writer, or is that strictly for you guys?
So the kind of proofreading marks and all the copy editing marks, that's just for the typesetters.
Okay.
I have learnt them because I'm really cool. But I can't not do them now. Like,
yeah,
you know, if I'm just editing for myself sort of thing, I'll kind of, you know, put all those marks in, but, you know, it's just shorthand, I guess. Yeah, so because otherwise, because all the kind of corrections will be taken in by the typesetter, and so it needs to be kind of easily identifiable and easily kind of translatable, which is why, you know, it's just all these symbols, you know, so kind of a circle with a little tail on the end, or a little hashtag sign, or anything like that. So yeah, it's the kind of secret code.
Yeah.
But I don't think there would really be a time when we would kind of send that to the author, because that would probably just scare the living daylights out of them, be like, what does it mean?
I think there's like a big stage in between working with your main editor on a Word document, and once you are both happy, there's kind of there are several other rungs of the ladder that turn it into actually the pages of a book that go to a printer. And that's copy editing, proofreading. It basically, you've got to turn it from a Word document broadly into a PDF and kind of mark, and then some errors get introduced along the way, lines go missing and things. So all of that happens slightly behind the scenes, like a writer would be involved and see all the different versions, how it looks on the page. But actually, copy editors and proofreaders and typesetters are the people who are doing the work at that point.
Okay, then. Let's have a little dig into your kind of preferences in terms of books, because we've heard about kind of what you kind of read and what you're into for work. But what do you like as a reader? What are your favorite genres? And do you have a, say, specific book or an author you know off the top of your head that you could say is your favorite?
Ooh, favorite. That's
it is tough.
As a friend and colleague, you should say my book.
Obviously, Lizzy is the best author in the entire world.
I'll allow you to have a second favorite.
Thank you very much. I just really love crime and thrillers. It's I just absolutely live and breathe them. I mean, one thing that I am really enjoying about working at the Novelry is kind of having that, you know, kind of the opportunity to work on other books. You know, I've done some children's books, which I've just absolutely loved doing, because it's just such a kind of different sort of creative, mindset. This is a really hard question. I don't know. I mean, I do have an absolutely huge obsession with the Orphan X books by Greg Hurwitz, because they're just so fun and brilliant. And anytime there's a new one out, I'm like, go. Yeah, I think he's like, I mean, he as in Greg the author, and he as in the obviously I've completely forgotten what the character's name is. Evan Smoke is I
was going to say someone in the chat might have known that for us, but
like they're just cool, really, really cool people, and I just really like spending time in that world, which is fun.
Fantastic. Lizzy?
I feel like my favorite books are quite eclectic. Like they come from I love The Secret History, but also Station 11 is one of my favorites. So I wouldn't say all my favorite books are crime or speculative or fall in any one place. And also it changes all the time, to be honest. I feel like I'll read something and be like, that is a new favorite. And then I might, a few weeks later, I'll be like, no, this is better than that. So I think I'm quite fickle in that regard.
I've got a question that I don't think it's a stupid one, but it's from me, so it might be. When it comes to publishing a book or taking on a book, should I say, is it important of timing these days? As in, if I've got a certain type of book, could it possibly be rejected because it's not kind of the right time? How does that work?
There is, I suppose, kind of general trends within the market. So there are things, I don't know if you recall that adult colouring books had a real moment a few years ago.
Yeah.
So there are kind of those trends that come and go quite quickly in fiction as well as non-fiction. But I think it's also true that a really good book will be popular at any time. So you might say, oh, this isn't true. But for example, if historical fiction were having a really quiet time and nothing was really selling, still, I think if a brilliant historical novel went out to agents and to editors and genuinely was outstanding, people would find it, and it would, you know, I don't think that alone would kind of cause it, but there's certainly, you know, as we like, psychological thrillers are still really popular and have been for a long time, and crime generally. So there are kind of, I'd say there are kind of the small waves that go up and down like colouring books, and much bigger ones like crime, but actually a good book is a good book.
Yeah. I mean, crime is always, it's for some reason at the forefront of everything. Podcasts, books, TV programs. It's like a kind of weird obsession. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people want to write about that so much?
I think it's, part of me thinks that, you know, there's some level of, you know, if I'm reading about it and it's not happening to me, like, you know, in this very moment, I can kind of enjoy what's happening in this fictional world because it's not something that I'm having to hear about that's actually happened in the real world. And so you kind of get that fascination factor, which I think, you know, which potentially sounds horrible to say, but, you know, it's, you know, like, I think people are really fascinated by crime. You know, it's why true crime documentaries are always so popular, because I think, you know, the kind of villains are always really interesting, you know, kind of psychologically, because I think they feel so alien to what we know. And so, yeah, I mean, that's like, I've just kind of always been slightly kind of, fascinated by it all.
I also think one of the kind of most important parts of storytelling is that the stakes are high. And in a crime novel, it's often life and death, and it doesn't in many ways get higher stakes than that. So that, in a sense, creates a drama, and it makes momentum, and it makes a compelling read by virtue of having such high stakes.
It's almost like it's like almost fiction, but could be reality as well. It's a fine line there. But yeah, it's fascinating. It is absolutely massive at the moment, and it has been for quite some time. Okay, so let's have a little chat then about the pitches that were sent in to us. And thank you for everyone that did send those in. We've only got a few we can read through, so I do apologize if you didn't get feedback on them. But thank you anyway. We will use the ones that we're going to chat about. Any of those tips do apply to us all. So whether we pick something up constructively, that is not negative feedback. It is something constructive, and that can be applied to everybody. So thank you for sending them in, because it will help everyone in the community as well. So Lizzy, do you want to give us the first one?
Sure. I wonder if it's worth saying too that when we are talking about kind of a one-line pitch or a hook, I think there are lots of different kind of phrases for the same thing. It's really that kind of pithy one-liner that sums it up. So the challenge is always brevity, and also getting across the stakes in such a short amount of time. So there were a few that stood out to us. I'm going to read this out. Sorry, I'm looking at a different screen, which is why I'm just turning away from you all. With one touch, Rebecca DeVroe can solve a murder or prevent one. But what happens when her touch tells her she committed one? So Tash and I really liked kind of the setup of this, that statement followed by a question. We felt there was kind of a tension. Obviously, the stakes, we're talking about murder here, the idea that she might have committed a murder. The thing we felt would elevate it even further was just a little bit more detail, because we felt like we weren't entirely sure if this was kind of a magical novel or fantastical, if it was set in this world, and how it works. So I think the challenge with making that one even stronger would be trying to put in more detail without making it too long.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So how do you think that someone could do that? Because that is obviously a chunk already. And then how do you add into that without feeling like you're putting too much in there?
I think it often helps to use one word for a character, or to describe. So, for example, with one touch, someone, Rebecca DeVroe. So it might be magician. I don't feel like that is the right answer for this one. But there might be a word you could put in there that just adds one word to it, but kind of tells me as a reader or a reviewer or a journalist or whoever I might be, an agent, a little bit more about where this novel sits. So I often think add a word before, maybe it's an age if your book is aimed at children, a 6-year-old girl or 15-year-old girl. Or it might be a profession if you're writing, doctor, someone is doing this. So I would maybe try to add to your characters with just 1 or 2 words that clarify them and thus your story.
Fantastic. Tash, any advice on that?
No.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I'm just trying to think. I think that one in particular was kind of instantly very intriguing.
Okay.
But it's kind of, as Lizzy says, it's just kind of giving a little bit more detail. I think what can sometimes be quite helpful is to kind of drill it down and then kind of bring it back out again and then drill it down in a different way, and just kind of try lots of kind of alternative ways of kind of saying the same pitch.
You both kind of mentioned how that one kind of jumped out at you a little bit. I mean, what did you notice first? Why was that special in that way?
So I think for me, this idea of solving a murder or preventing one was intriguing, but also a little bit confusing, which I think was the bit that would benefit from ironing out. Like, how with one touch can you solve a murder or prevent one? How does that actually manifest? Mm-hmm. But then that sense that what happens when her touch tells her she committed one, well, that's suddenly interesting, because you get the impression she's committed a murder without knowing she's committed a murder. There's a question in it.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a question and a plot twist within that one line, isn't there?
Yeah. So just a bit more detail so that it feels grounded would be helpful, I think.
Well, there you go. That's some great advice there for putting a twist and questions in there. Always good. There's a few statements coming in that are all around the similar thing. So I'm gonna put them up on screen. Lopi, hello to you. Thank you for your question. Statement. I'm worried mine is too long, and Leah said the same. I wrote a paragraph, and so our pitch is supposed to be one line. So, if you are submitting, how does that work? Do you put a line, a paragraph as well, and how does that work?
I think you need to know what the one line is. And what I always say to people is that bit where if you are pushing a book into a friend's hand, like to your mum or your sister or a mate, where you're like, you'll love this because what? Like, it's all about someone who discovers they kill someone when they touch someone, or, what's the thing that you say about the books you love? Because it's never that long. When you recommend a book, you rarely kind of talk them through the plot or what would be the blurb on the back. It's normally a really succinct single line. It can be 2 lines, but you want it to be short and snappy. Does that feel right to you, Tash?
Yeah, I think you want it to be something that's memorable, and I think you've who was it? I think it was Juliet Mushins came and did a talk with us fairly recently, where she kind of said, a pitch should always try and get across the kind of character, setting, and conflict. And you don't need paragraphs to get that across. And so, I think people potentially sometimes kind of confuse a blurb, which is, the kind of marketing copy that's on the back of a book, which is kind of really meant to sort of, build a bit of a bigger picture about the story and the characters and how the two interact. Whereas the pitch is, you're really just trying to kind of get across the central dilemma of the story in that kind of, when this happens, X happens to Y.
Fantastic.
And it's there for TV drama. If you're recommending a new TV show to someone and you say, oh, it's called this, think about what that line is that you use for things that you are recommending and what someone would be saying about your story were they to recommend it in that way.
Yeah, it's quite a good one on the top of my head now. I'm thinking about Behind Her Eyes. Are you familiar with? Yeah, for example, I often said, basically the ending will basically blow your mind. So, for example, if I was putting that in there, would that be involved? Would I be prompted to put something like that in there?
You could say, like, with a totally unexpected ending, but what I would say that people use that a lot now, like you'll never see the ending coming.
Yeah,
So that
yeah.
feels a little bit overdone. And actually, I sometimes think the pitch should be the thing that will keep you reading from the beginning. So it will happen quite quickly when you start. It doesn't have to encompass your whole story. But once I've read chapter 1, why am I going to read chapter 2?
Yeah.
And your pitch should kind of answer that as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I think also, you know, one book can have sort of several different pitches. And so you've got to kind of keep in mind the sort of intended audience and the genre that you're writing in. So, you know, kind of as an example, I remember on a kind of course I went on once, we were asked to write different pitches for The Sound of Music. And there, yeah, you can turn that film into so many different types of story. It's hilarious. You know, obviously there's like singing nun, you know, kind of rescues a family who have, you know, kind of forgotten how to live. Or there's, you know, like family escape the Nazis helped by, you know, a convent of nuns, you know. So there are kind of always kind of different ways of creating the pitch. It's about kind of creating a pitch that has the right message for what it is that you're trying to say about the book.
That's amazing. I love that idea. I've got a panel show that people come on, and there's a few rounds where they create a few different things, and that is just giving me a great idea.
There you go.
Thank you. Okay, Lizzy, do we have another one?
Yeah, so here's another one that we really liked. It is a female-forward epic fantasy reimagining of the classic fairy tale Sleeping Beauty. What if Maleficent were Aurora's mother, and what if she wasn't really evil? We were really drawn to this kind of idea of reimagining Sleeping Beauty and kind of the structure of the pitch. The question we had is that actually there isn't menace in here anymore, because if Maleficent isn't evil, well, you've slightly lost the purpose of the story. Actually, where then does the drama come? If your baddie is actually a goodie, where are the stakes? So if it were, for example, you wake up Sleeping Beauty and it turns out she's evil, ... there's where your story begins. You've woken up a sleeping princess who's not kind of the picture perfect, lying in wait for her handsome prince woman, but instead the kind of the menacing element. So we really like the idea of the reimagining. We just felt there needs to be something in there that tells me where is the darkness and the tension going to come from here.
Yeah. For me, when you read that out, I thought that sounded really good, but then instantly didn't think of that question, which now makes complete sense. So why did that appeal to me so much, being the way that it was structured? And how do you think they would rearrange that perhaps to then... I mean, the question's still going to be there, isn't it? Because it's the idea of that story. So I can't really ask that question. But why do you think that appealed? And that was slightly longer than what we saw before as well.
Yeah, and I think you could probably make it a little shorter, you know, a reimagining of Sleeping Beauty in which Maleficent is Aurora's mother. She isn't evil, and something, the bit that kind of catalyzes the story, where the tension is. So you probably only need a few more words on the end there to fill in the gap.
Halo says these pictures are so good. Did you have a name on that one as well?
On that one, that was Joel Flanagan Granneman, if I said that right.
Fantastic. Tash, did you like that one as well?
I did, yeah. I mean, you know, I think what's interesting actually. So on the Novelry, we have a course called the Classic course, and we really kind of look at those old fairy tales and kind of how they actually really do form the basis for so many modern stories. And you know, it's kind of very much looking back to your childhood and kind of interpreting your dreams and everything. So kind of reimaginings are you know, kind of always a big tick for me.
Yeah, we had Soman. His name is so hard to pronounce. Soman Chinini came on the show, and he'd written Beasts and Beauty, which was a complete retelling of a lot of fairy tale classics. There was amazing illustration in there, and it was really interesting to see why people are so interested in that now as well. But I do agree, it's definitely on the rise, and even with film, we see that now as well. So it's really interesting, and I do like the darker twist on these stories, which is probably interesting because there was something we knew as kids that were lighthearted, and now we can kind of see some of the darker sides of it as well. Fantastic. Do we have any more, Lizzy?
So there was one that came in called Grandpa's Book, which is a bit longer. So should I read it out anyway?
If you're happy to, yeah.
Okay, it's not too long. So here we go. Grandpa died last month, and now his 2 grandchildren have discovered his secret book, revealing the existence of a magic wand growing on a tree. But first, they must decipher the puzzles left by Grandpa to show which tree might bear this treasure, and more importantly, decide if these are just more stories from Grandpa. But even if there is a tree and a wand, then there are no spells to learn or cast, and yet a sinister spectre is willing to offer each child a wish in exchange for the wand, should they find it. Both have an urgent and personal need for a miracle, especially when a mysterious illness threatens to steal their mum from them. Whichever way the children choose, all magic comes at a cost. Wow. So that feels very like the content that you get on the back of the book, the marketing copy.
I really like that last line. I think that's a brilliant last line of a blurb, definitely.
Definitely. And it's the idea we're familiar with that magic is there's always a payoff, a trade-off. So what I had a look at was how you might condense that into a single line or two. And this is where I got to. So after their grandfather's death, name a something, which might be a 12-year-old something, or who knows, depending on the characters, and name, again, a little description. Discover a secret puzzle book that promises magical treasure, but they aren't the only ones looking for a miracle. ... pictures.
A ... can do so much work for you.
Okay. Is that an ellipsis?
Yes.
Yes. Woo.
Yes, we should probably be using that term, the technical term.
No, I preferred that. That was fantastic.
Very dramatic.
Yes, it was. I particularly liked when you read it the first time, the very handy word sinister.
Yes,
which you kind of removed there as well.
Sinister is a great word, though. That could definitely go back in. I'm a fan of sinister.
So obviously that asked a lot of questions. The word sinister appealed to me as well, and you condensed that very well. Is it the fact that there were many questions in there and all kind of revolved around the same topic is how you were able to reduce that?
Yes, I think as, condensing a 90,000, however many word novel to one line is really challenging. So I think as Tash said earlier, your best bet is just to pick away at it, make it smaller and smaller and smaller, work out where you repeat something. I also think there's the challenge initially is to work out what is the heart of your story. And in an ideal world, I think you'd probably get maybe a quarter of the way, maybe slightly less through your book and think, hang on, right, where are we going? What is the story here? And certainly when we work with writers, it's something we try and nail down as early as possible. Because I think sometimes you risk writing it gives you a focus, it gives your story a focus, and it then gives your reader a focus when they're reading. So I think coming back to that question of why will my reader keep reading is really key. Because if you don't know why your reader's going to keep reading, it's going to be really hard for you to make sure that's evident on the page.
Fantastic.
Oh, have we frozen?
I was about to say, is this me who's frozen, or is this?
No, I can see you still. I think we're still here.
Are we taking over?
Yeah, let's take over. Do you have the other one? Do you have another one, Tash?
I do. Yes, I've got. I'm afraid I can't remember who sent it in. But so yes. So again, this is more of a kind of blurb that we have kind of distilled down to a pitch. So this one is. A small fishing village, a shunned healer, her daughter, tradition, superstition, and a world set to change. Carenza lives with her mother, the healer Meliora, on the edge of a small fishing community on the Cornish coast. The townsfolk, who work the fish runs of pilchard and mackerel that make their way up the Atlantic coast, call on her mother for help with their ailments, but never for her company. Carenza does not know why. Curses and superstitions whisper around her as she grows into a competent young woman, fighting for her place amongst the people of Porthgwen. But what has caused the rift between her and the town, and can their traditional way of life survive in the face of changing winds? Where the Gulls Fall Silent is a historical fiction that explores the lives of the fishermen and women who made their living from the rough Atlantic Ocean, the hardship they faced, the secrets that divided them, and the community spirit that pulled them through. A story of love, loss, hope, and second chances. So again, this would make really, really brilliant blurb copy. but in terms of a pitch, you've just got to kind of distill it down. So what I did here is I kind of asked myself who's the central character and what's the specific story around her. So what I've come up with, which I hope everyone likes, is the daughter of a shunned healer in a traditional Cornish fishing village on the brink of change, fights for acceptance from a community that has always hated her. ...
Hi.
You're back.
We just kept going.
I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I internet provider. Anyway, I only caught the end of that. Sounded wonderful, and what you just condensed that to is amazing.
I think it struck us. It had real atmosphere and character. And again, I think sometimes when you have those elements, atmosphere and character are less important to your pitch than story, I think is probably fair to say. So the best thing to do is kind of get your atmosphere in a word or two, sinister or haunted or whatever it might be. Get your character with just a couple of words and dedicate as much space as you can then to the plot. What is happening? What is exciting? What is fresh?
Fantastic. What I was trying to say was, before I disappeared, guys, we're about 8 minutes left. We've flown through this, which is amazing. Thank you, guys. Send your questions in now for the guys that you want to ask the questions. Please send them in now. And before we ask them, Lizzy and Tash, between the two of you, if you could give 3 top tips for writing the pitch, what would they be?
As in 3 each or 3 between?
No, between the two of you, just 3 top 3
okay.
between.
Let's go story first as the first
Story
one.
first.
Story first. It needs to be the thing that keeps reading, and it's unlikely that your reader will fall in love with a setting in chapter 1 or a character in chapter 1 to such a level that they will keep reading purely for that. So make sure there is a little bit of plot there at least that makes them want to keep going.
Yeah. I'm gonna steal the thing that I said earlier, which is to take into consideration the reader and the genre, because that will really help to kind of focus what your pitch needs to do and the message that it needs to deliver.
And I think probably the most challenging part is to make it fresh, by which I mean, really, you want people to look at that pitch and think, I've never read or seen or heard that talked about before, but it sounds really cool. So it might be kind of a police procedural in which we see a kind of a police event that we've never seen or a type of police officer we've never met. It might be a thriller in which there's something totally original. It might be a certain type of ghost story. What is your book doing that readers of this genre won't have encountered before, that speaks to the genre or something familiar, but that says this is a step up?
Amazing. Yeah, fantastic pieces of advice. Thank you so much. But you could almost have a pitch party after kind of what you said about earlier, Tash. Could you do that with your friends and just say, look, can you all try and write a pitch for me? But they wouldn't really know the content. Yeah. Okay, so let's get some questions from you guys. Thank you so much for sending them in. Lopi, hello to you. Thanks for your question. For a pitch, is revealing character more important than additional details about the story? What sells better?
I do think it's story. I mean, sometimes inevitably you need a character for there to be a story about. But I think it's hard to sell a brand new, totally original character in a line, because most of them reflect, it's hard to build someone that quickly, whereas your story can be done fast and smart.
Yeah. And I think, generally your story will be, here's this character and here's what happens to them. And it's the what happens to them that is probably going to entice readers.
Yeah. I mean, you can't really, as you mentioned, buy into that character quite yet because you don't know them, do you? So I think I agree with that completely. Thanks, Sophie. Hello, Scott. Thank you for your question. What are the most common editing suggestions you could make regarding prose and plot?
I feel like Tash and I talk a lot about character motivation, which is, why is your character doing what they're doing? I think particularly when you have a main character and kind of a cast of secondary characters, it's very easy to make your secondary layer move in a way that helps the story rather than in a way that makes sense for them. So they ask a question that you need your main character to answer rather than the question that individual actually needs an answer to. So I think making sure you know what every character wants at every point is really valuable. What else do we say a lot of, Tash?
Show, don't tell.
Show, don't tell. Oh, I know that's frustrating.
Any tips on that as a someone who is writing, that from your point of view?
I think if you can show us something we haven't seen. So I think it's really tempting to be like, it was a bright sunny day and the sky was blue. Well, what if the sky was green? Or, you know, what if you look down at the grass and it was blue? What happened that made it blue? I don't know, kids spilt paint, or it doesn't have to be magical. Tell us something that we haven't seen, because that will capture our attention. And I also think it's a easier way to show things if you don't feel like you're repeating things that is already so well known.
Yeah.
So in this story, they had 4 dragons, not 3.
Yeah, exactly. The more the merrier on the dragons.
And they had no feelings. So there you go.
No feelings whatsoever.
No.
I think also it's, you know, kind of, if there's a kind of key important event, or, you know, something that happens in the story that really kind of moves the story along, make sure that you're allowing the reader to experience it on the page, and don't just kind of say, you know, like, oh, you know, I'm now in this new situation and this has just happened, but I'm just going to quickly tell you about it, rather than, you know, having the reader, you know, be in that character's footsteps and, you know, kind of experiencing that big event for themselves, because that's kind of really crucial to reader engage. Oh my God, I can't speak. Reader engagement. There we go. Which is, you know, obviously incredibly key.
Fantastic. I must be rubbing off on you, stuttering your words. Okay, Joe Paulson says, this might be a very tough one to answer. Best pitch you've ever read or heard?
Ooh,
very tough.
That's really
tough. Jaws in space? Is that Alien?
That is Alien.
Jaws in space.
In space, no one can hear you scream.
Yeah, but I think so. I think the pitch for Alien was Jaws set in space.
Was it really?
I believe so.
And then the tagline, which again is one of the best taglines ever, was "In space, no one can hear you scream."
I had never heard it's Jaws in space, and I kind of see why, but that's almost, I don't know. I feel like Alien was so much ahead of Jaws, you know.
I think that's, and we could be wrong on the timing. I don't
know.
I definitely feel like I've heard that before, so I will back you up here.
Let us know in the chat if you know.
A 3-word pitch, so that's really taking brevity to the extreme.
But if we talk about that doesn't really give anything about the story either.
It kind of doesn't need to.
I think because everyone knows what happens in Jaws and knows the tension, and everyone knows that space is this kind of big scary thing.
Yeah.
The kind of the combining of those two tells you everything you need to know.
You get major baddies in an unfamiliar setting, but this time you're going from the deep sea to space.
So this is almost portraying the feelings you're going to have rather than what you might encounter.
Yeah.
I love that.
The experience, amazing. I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, we've got time for one more. Thank you very much for everyone who sent the questions in. And this is from Linda. What are your thoughts on the use of prologue? Often discussed topic.
I love a prologue. Do you think the same, Tash? I don't know. We've never talked about this. I don't know your feelings.
I love a prologue if it's there for a reason. If it's kind of useless and, you know, doesn't. So I think the best kind of prologue is one that, you know, kind of is then explained at some point in the book, and when you kind of encounter that scene or character or something for a second time, your kind of perception of it is completely changed from when you first read it.
Okay.
For me, that's my favorite type of prologue.
I think I would also be wary of using a prologue to ask a question that you then, so using your prologue to set up that stakes and that big idea and that pitch, and then your chapter 1 just rewinds, and for the next kind of half of your book, none of that feels right. I think if you throw that ball in the air in the prologue, whatever that question may be, you've got to keep it up. So don't kind of fall into the trap of thinking, I've created the tension in my prologue, so now I'll settle back and tell the story. If you kind of got our expectations up here, you've got to keep them high.
Amazing. Lizzy, Tash, I can't thank you enough for this show and coming on and joining us and spreading all that amazing advice and information that you have learned along your careers. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed the show, and thank you to everyone that's watching or listening back, whatever you're doing. It really helps support the show as well. From me, I want to say thank you. I'm sure the guys will say thank you, and good luck with everything. If you were interested, guys, in the Novelry and everything you've learned about that today, that will be in the description of the show. We'll leave links there for you guys to check it out. The reception coming in is fantastic. Anything for you guys?
Thank you. No, thank you so much for having us. It was so nice to be here and to chat editing and books and pitches. So yeah,
amazing.
I hope we've helped.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Just so you know, before you do go, guys, next week we have a discussion panel with a lot of indie authors about marketing, which is something we all, as indie authors, ran into a big brick wall when we discovered what that was. So join us next week for a big discussion, and that's going to be a complete chat show, not scripted, load of us chatting about tips and advice and the harsh realities of that. That would be fantastic as well. So please do tune in. And from me, goodbye, Tash, Lizzy. Thank you so much. We will see you soon, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.